Welcome here on YouTube. This is my first video of the new year. It took a little longer than I expected. I took a break. I kind of needed one. I did upload a video on my Senior Tech Tips channel. I was vlogging on the Staten Island Ferry. Got to spend the holidays in New York City and had a real good time with family and friends, and back here in New York. A lot has been going on since I was last here on December 19th, and at the same time, the same things are going on. The impeachment articles have not been sent to the Senate yet, though over this weekend, Nancy Pelosi has announced that she will be sending them this coming week over to the Senate. The delay has largely been caused by Mitch McConnell, who has stubbornly refused to enter into an agreement with Chuck Schumer, the minority leader in the Senate, over rules for the trial, which makes it very difficult for the Speaker, Nancy Pelosi, to do her job, which is assign House managers to run the trial, because she doesn't know what the rules will be. And as anyone who has practiced law can tell you, that depending on what witnesses you're going to call and how the trial is being done, you might select a different member of your staff to handle it. Mitch McConnell has said that he doesn't want witnesses. He won't agree to witnesses and says he'll only consider them after the opening statements by the prosecution and the response by the defense. But he's also said that he didn't think that the witnesses were required, and that he was coordinating the impeachment trial with the president. That is pure corruption. He will have to sign an oath stating that he will be a fair and impartial juror. And he's already announced to the world that he doesn't intend to honor the oath that he is required to sign. Mitch needs to go. Unfortunately, the only way to remove a senator is at the polls. And he has a tough race coming up in Kentucky, as does his buddy who is taking the same position, Senator Lindsey Graham in South Carolina. Both of these guys are acting as corrupt senators. They're engaged in violations of their ethics, of their oaths, to conduct an impartial trial. Nancy Pelosi is in a no-win situation because the Republicans have the votes in the Senate, and the Democrats need 3 senators to come along with their side. And the only 2 that seem to be a possibility are Susan Collins of Maine and former presidential candidate Mitt Romney, senator of Utah. And they have not given any strong indication that they are willing to buck the Republican establishment and do the right thing. So that's really what we're dealing with. We're dealing with corruption at the highest level. Moscow Mitch and his Senate buddies, Lindsey Graham and the rest of the cohort of basically thugs that the Republicans have in office. Of course, the occupant of the White House, who has almost started a war with Iran through a targeted assassination, both in violation of U.S. law and international law, which in and of itself is a ground for impeachment. And though the House has not moved to add that ground, it started a ricochet of action. There was an attack on a U.S. military base. The Iranians had the courtesy of notifying the Iraqis, who they knew would notify the Americans that the attack was coming, so that no Americans were killed or no one else was killed, though Iraqi radio for domestic consumption claimed that 30 or 35 people had been killed. Then, at the same time, a Ukrainian, of all the jets in the world, coming into Tehran airport, a Ukrainian jet was shot down, killing 176 people. The story that's being put out all universally around without substantial evidence, as this was an accident caused in the fog of war. All sides want this to be seen as an accident. Initially, the Iranians denied to having shot down the plane, and they called it propaganda, but eventually they came around to admitting and claimed they had done it by accident. Do I believe it was done by accident? I have my doubts. I mean, this has happened before. I mean, the first time I remember a plane being shot down, and it was intentional, it was by the old Soviet Union in the Andropov days. Korean flight KAL was the airline. Flight 007, if I remember correctly, was shot down during the 80s. And then during the Iraq-Iranian War, the United States shot down an Iranian aircraft airliner. So these things do happen. And those first two cases probably were mistakes. This one may well have been a mistake. I don't know. But I'm always suspicious when things like this happen. When the reports first came out that it was just a crash and it had to have been shot down, I posted on Facebook, I didn't believe that. That to me, I knew it was too much of a coincidence, and I said that right on Facebook the minute that the first reports of the plane downing were there, and people were thinking that it was an accident caused by either pilot error or mechanical failure. That didn't make sense to me given what was going on, and that turned out to be correct. It wasn't that. What the real story is, we may never know, because no one really wants a war. Even Donald Trump. Trump made the decision to kill Soleimani without understanding the repercussions of his actions. Nobody wants war with Iran. Now, I've talked to some Iranians. I have had some Iranian students who wanted the United States to overthrow the Iranian government. But that was more of an emotional reaction than a really rational reaction, looking at what that would involve and the amount of deaths that would be involved. Soleimani was a bad guy, but you don't go around assassinating leaders of other countries. It's unlawful. The CIA used to be in this business. Think back to in the 60s, Patrice Lumumba in the Congo, where the U.S. CIA was involved. Think in the 80s, all the involvement in Chile with Allende, the U.S. CIA was involved, and in President Diem in Vietnam during the late 60s. There have been numerous occasions where the United States has been involved in one way or the other in the assassination of foreign leaders. Congress got together, passed regulations with committees involving the CIA, so this was not supposed to happen. Trump has no regard for U.S. law, no regard for the War Powers Act, and has come out and said that he doesn't think the War Powers Act is constitutional, even though the Constitution specifically gives the power to declare war to the president. Now, we have to understand that presidents have been ignoring this. It's not just Trump. Since 1950, since Truman bringing the U.S. into the Korean War, no president in the United States has followed the Constitution's requirement of declaring war. This is an important point. What does this tell us? It tells us that precedent, that when someone is allowed to do something, it makes it easier for the next person to do the same thing. And this is why we have to really stand up. When I was in college, the last political science paper I wrote was on the prerogative powers of the president, the inherent powers in the presidency, and how they have grown. And my paper was on the Gulf of Tonkin resolution, which was used to get U.S. troops on the ground in Vietnam. And I called it an expansion of the prerogative powers of the presidency. Prerogative meaning certain powers that are inherent in the office, and that by President Johnson using the War Powers Act, claiming that an American ship had been attacked in international waters. Turned out to be a false claim. It was attacked in waters claimed by the People's Republic of Vietnam, aka North Vietnam. But they used that as an excuse to get troops into Vietnam. So we have had a long history of this kind of behavior. President Obama engaged in drone strikes, killing people on many, many occasions. So this is not a Republican issue. This is not a Democratic issue. It's an issue. It's an institutional issue that the war-making power of Congress has been usurped by the president with little resistance from Congress, because Congress politically didn't want the responsibility, to be quite frank with you. And we've seen this get to a point with Trump, a person who is totally ignorant of history, doesn't have the temperament to study and find out what's going on. Everyone in his cabinet admits he doesn't read, and so he doesn't know. He probably couldn't tell you the difference between a Shia and a Sunni. He does not know the history of the region. And he doesn't know that the Iraqis don't really like Americans. And this goes way, way back. The Iranians have very good reasons not to like the Americans, going way, way back to our long support of the Shah of Iran. So, and prior to that, to the U.S. involvement in the overthrow of the government. So this situation, which has been going on now for many, many years, came to a head last week. And we looked like we were on the brink of a major war. And both parties stepped back from the brink. The Iranians notified Iraq that they were going to hit American bases in Iraq. They did, and no one was killed because the Americans and Iraqis were prepared for it. Then the Trump administration did not respond to those attacks, and that was key. I give Donald Trump and his advisors, particularly his advisors, credit for being smart enough not to retaliate. That was a very, very good move. So, we're now hoping that this situation will diffuse itself, but we know that relations with Iran are very, And the main result, of course, of this immediate problem is Trump's idiotic, Trump's stupid, Trump's ignorant decision to pull out of the Iran nuclear deal with U.S. allies that everyone said Iran was complying with. Trump, in his desire to undo everything President Obama had done before, and he has systematically tried to do that, from the Iran nuclear deal to the Affordable Care Act. His racism drives Trump, just like it drove his father. It drives him. And he has little regard for the repercussions. You know, Trump would make a terrible chess player because he can't see beyond what's immediately in front of his nose. He doesn't think steps ahead. And if he had, he wouldn't have pulled out the nuclear arms treaty, because what's happening now is a direct result of that. Dumb move. Just plain dumb. But we know that Trump is not a bright man. He's a gangster, part of a gangster conspiracy, which we have to move from office. I don't think the Democrats are doing a very good job of handling this impeachment trial. There should have been TV ads put up by political action committees, by the Democratic Party, talking about how the Senate is prejudging the trial, that Mitch McConnell has prejudged the trial, that he's working with the administration. He's admitted this. Where are the TV ads? I haven't seen one. The American public needs to be politicized. They need to be made aware of what the Republicans are doing. The Democratic Party has been very poor at doing this, at raising the issue publicly. TV ads should be out talking about what Mitch McConnell, Lindsey Graham, and the rest of the gang of conspirators have done and are doing. We have to push our representatives, because clearly the Democrats are not assertive enough. They don't look out for their interests, let alone our interests. So we need to push them much harder. There's a debate Tuesday night. Watch it. Let's see what happens in the debate. Let's see if these issues come up. And with that note, I'm going to end this discussion. The story continues. Please post comments below. Please hit the like button. I know politics is stressful. It's frustrating, but it affects our daily lives. And a lot of people don't see that connection. And so they hear it, and I don't want to hear any more about that. I'm sick of it. I'm sick of it. I'm sick of it. But it affects you. Don't forget, resistance is futile.
It's irrelevant. Self-determination is irrelevant. You must comply.
That is what Donald Trump and Republicans would like us to think.
Resistance is futile.
But we say resistance is not futile. Have a good day. Hit the like button. Subscribe to this channel if you'd like to hear more videos like this.